Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's UCISA Enterprise Architecture Community of Practice webinar. I'm Lex Wilkinson. I'm the current chair of the Community of Practice group, and I'll shortly be handing over to Alex Lee. The session is being recorded today, and we'll make the link available afterwards. So the subject of today's webinar is the HE capability model. Well, we've done the what, now let's do the how. As many of you will be aware, the UCISA HE capability model was published about a year ago. Alex was a member of the project team that developed the model, and he has used capability models extensively when working in consultancy at Deloitte. To quote Alex, finding applications for the capability model isn't hard. Getting people to move from what they know can be. And Alex has kindly agreed to share some examples of how he's helped people to do that. If you've got any questions during the presentation, please feel free to ask via the comments function, and Alex will either pick those up as he goes, or we can have some Q&As at the end. So over to Alex. Thank you.
Thanks, Lex. Good morning, everybody. Yes, just two quick bits of admin. One is you might be able to hear I have got a bit of cold, so I apologize for the slightly nasal delivery. The second thing is it would be good. These webinars are always kind of interesting to do because you don't know how much people are engaged with them. So if you do have a question, really happy to take it. I will pause between kind of each part of the what I'm going to show you and see if there are any questions. So what I'm going to do is take you through the model with 5 different use cases. We're going to move through them pretty quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about kind of why we selected one capability over another, just more to give you an idea of what the problem statement was and why I used the model to solve it. So these are all HE examples. You'll have seen some of them or in an earlier version when I put some stuff on the JISC email thread. So some of this stuff you'll see. I'll talk a little bit about why I created a tool, and it'll probably become obvious after the first couple because it was certainly a barrier for me in being able to use it the way I wanted to use it. So we're going to start high at the strategic level, and we're going to finish down at quite a detailed project level. So I expect this is going to take about 40 minutes, so we've got lots of time for questions. So I'm just going to pause for a second. Anybody's got any questions? And then I'm going to crack on. Cracking on. Okay, so you should be able to see on your screen a version of the capability model. So if we look, I should have put it up first, ready. If we look at the capability model as is, this is the one that was released about this time last year. A piece of work run by Ian Anderson. I was working on it with a number of people from UK universities. It's really excellent piece of work to be involved in. I really enjoyed it. And we spent a lot of time trying to create something that felt it was representative of sort of the UK university sector. And it genuinely is. And again, if we've got time at the end, we can talk about kind of where I've found differences in some of the semantics rather than the structure and kind of where we might want to go next. Now, interestingly, the first examples I'm going to show you, we did actually have to change it. And the reason for that was these examples are from a conservatoire, so it's dance and drama. And they are very keen, quite rightly to say they're not a standard degree awarding sort of institution. They are, very much, they have a slightly different role around where they are in the community. They obviously have quite different teaching, quite different environments around sort of the spaces that they teach in, different cohort of students. It is quite a different sort of set of learning provisions. So one of the key things, if we look at this, so what you see here is potentially a version of the model that was created in Visio by Claire at Portsmouth, and this is just a kind of slightly updated version of that. And one of the key things for this particular conservatoire is they need to grow. So this is not an unusual thing that I hear from most universities about would like to recruit more students, but it's really a thing that they are in a position where for them to meet their aspirations, they really do need to grow between 10 and 15% over the next 7 to 8 years, and that's a fairly significant ambition when you think the cohort for dance and drama is not the same cohort as it would be for engineering. You could argue there's less people doing it, but so one of the first things that we did before we did the actual work was we spent not very long, I think about 4 or 5 hours, looking at the model and saying, where does it work for us? And what we've done, and I'm not going to go through all of it, but at the top of the modeling strategy and governance, we took some stuff out because they kind of went, yeah, that's kind of one capability for us. We wouldn't split those capabilities. We wouldn't see ourselves as having those different capabilities enacted by different people. So we collapsed a bunch of level ones together. And we did a little bit of sort of rigor on that to make sure that they were genuinely the same things we were talking about. We left most of the teaching stuff in there. You know, these things, capabilities tend to exist in any university in the Deep Purple section. The research section we kind of left. We didn't do a lot of work on it because it's not really a big part of their business. We will go back and look at that. We just didn't really have the time. The sections I thought were interesting are the light purple, as I'm moving down the screen here, artistic community and commercial fundraising activity. So if we just apologies for flicking screens, but this is quite important, I think. If we look down here, we had a thing that was called commercial activity, and at that conservatoire, we said they don't think of that as firstly as commercial activity. They really think of it as performance. They say that most of the work that we do in the commercial world is probably more about fundraising. It's about community engagement, and it's about getting people into HE from the local communities primarily. So you can see we've added some new level ones here. We've got commercial and fundraising activity. We've got a thing called community engagement, which we don't have in the standard model. And that's about putting on performances and also making spaces for people to come and perform. And then we've got this pre-HE specialist training, which essentially we could have put into teaching and learning. It's kind of, my argument was it's recruitment, and their argument is it really isn't. And this is a really interesting conversation. So I said, well, that's recruitment, isn't it? And they went, no, it's not, because this is about our ability to get people here. This is really about outreach. This is before they come to the conservatoire. We're really acting as a sort of member of the community, not as a recruiting agent. Some of the stuff we do, we know that these people won't come here, they'll come somewhere else. So it was really fascinating to have that discussion around how they saw those capabilities being enacted within their own conservatoire, and sort of my challenges, sort of, you know, kind of from my sort of background in consulting, where you'd say, well, structurally that's not where it lives, and they would kind of go, yeah, well, that's not the way it works here. So and the key point they were saying to me was that if we want to work with the principals group, the top level group, then we need this to look like something that they can feel represents the conservatoire. And we changed a few things down. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we did some stuff around artistic and performance management. So we added some additional capabilities that are not would not be sort of surfaced at the top level of a university. So it's things like costume management. You know, costume management is something you'd do probably in a university, but it's a really big thing you do at a conservatoire. So they wanted this thing to have the capabilities surfaced where they were very important. They need to be on the front page. So I'm just going to pause briefly again because I'm not sure I can see all the screens, but any questions on that? Nope. Lex, if you see a question come up, because I've got this running full screen, do let me know, yeah?
Yeah, there's a question. Would you see the light purple area as mapping to the concept of the civic university?
Yes, I would. That's a very good question. And actually, I did write on my notes Civic University. So whoever asked that question, thank you very much for. Yes, I would see it very much like that. And they did talk to me about it in that purpose. And I thought that was it was a very good way for them to explain to me that it was not a recruitment activity. So yes, very much so. So it's a very insightful comment. So what did we do? Okay, so what we've got here is some very simple heat mapping. Anybody that's ever worked with me knows I'm a bit mad for heat mapping, and I use it generally because I think it's a great visualization tool. So what we've done here is we've mapped all the capabilities. Oh, one of the things that I'm not going to show you today because I haven't got time is I changed some of the definitions here, and I did it by saying to them, you know, when we change this, the next version of the model, you're going to have to go back and do some work. But some of the definitions they really didn't like. So we've changed a few of the definitions. And when we did that, we then took a version of this to the principals management group. So that's the principals of the conservatoire and the sort of heads of, you know, whether that's the professional services side or the teaching and learning side. We talked to them about what we've coloured in red. We said these things, if we don't focus on these capabilities as kind of the operational instantiation of our corporate plan, of which objective one is to grow the number of students by 10 to 15% in 7 years, then we will die in a ditch. And that's the words that I tend to use to say, if we don't focus on our curriculum design, if we don't focus on the way that we make our offers, if we don't focus on the way we retain our students, if we don't create better content for the students, if we don't do things around our reputation, we cannot be successful. And one of the key things I was saying to the principals management group, they were saying, well, yeah, but that's really important as well. And so is that. I'm like, yeah, but we're doing strategy. And if you've ever taught strategy, the standard thing is it's about what you don't do. And so it was a great exercise to say, what is it that you absolutely will die in a ditch for? Because, you're not a big organization compared to where Lex's organization of Sheffield Hallam, you don't have that number of staff. Everybody's really, really busy. The regulations are so hard for smaller conservatoires because it's the same amount of work for less people. So, what do you really need to focus on to be successful? And in the orange, we were saying, yeah, these things are important, but they're not as important. And it was really interesting. So we went up with a straw man at 1.3. You'll see on the right, it's got 1.4. And we took it to the principal's management group, which was about 9 people. And by the way, conservatoires are great. You go to like board meetings in conservatoires, they give you cake. Like no other university does that. I just love working with conservatoires. And we did an exercise, took about an hour, and they've done some more work on it, and I can't show you that because it's quite confidential. But they came up with about a 75% sort of consistent with what we'd done at the group below that group, and I didn't really mind who was right. What I really cared about was the amount of really passionate conversations going between person that's responsible for teaching dance, the person responsible for teaching drama, the head of the sort of the professional services bit, the sort of registrar, and all of this stuff. So I think what it did was it allowed them to coalesce around some issues that were probably hidden a little bit in plain sight. And my understanding of what's happened afterwards is they've really sort of taken to this model. They don't all I would be lying if I said they all think it's brilliant. Quite a few of them kind of went, yeah, I don't really like that. It doesn't really work for me. I'm more of a process guy, or I'm more of a visual guy, or, I like to see things written down. And I got that. But what I said to them is, look, as something you can use across the whole of the conservatoire and explain to people what you're doing and what their role in it, if it does nothing more than essentially give you a version that you can keep showing to people, that has to be a value use for your time. And that's where they've gone with it. And essentially what they've done now is they've linked a whole bunch of their operational activities to this plan. So that one is kind of, let's take a strategy objective, let's map it out on the capability map, let's choose our priorities, and let's then create operational plans. So it's almost acting as two things. One, it's a visualization to show the conservatoire what they're doing, and it's also acting as a bridge between a strategic plan and an operational plan. And I think it works very well for that. And they have gone through their other objectives now and mapped them onto here, and they've got some really interesting work about which ones, because when you get to 5 or 6, you start to see the same thing coming up. So they're kind of like, we really got to focus on this one because that's hitting 5 out of the 6. So that's number 1. I'm going to move on. Like I said, whistle swap tour. I'm just going to check with my colleague, Lex. Any questions?
No, we're good at the minute.
We're good. All right. Okay. This one, this is kind of where you get into, this is starting to get a bit tedious to do, right? So one of the things that we did with the same conservatoire, and I'm not going to get, we were looking at a number of these capabilities that we'd said are incredibly important, and we have to focus on them. So the first thing we did is kind of go, what's the state of the nation on those? Look, kind of what is our capability around curriculum design? What is our capability? How are we going to assess that? Now, some of you guys may have, if you've worked with Ian Anderson or those guys, you may have done the poled out process. Location, data, application technology, and owner. Sorry, Mr. O. And for a small conservatoire, that's not going to work, right? They're not going to do all of that. So we did what we call POD, which was the three things that they thought they really wanted to understand about their capabilities, and not their capabilities, oh, let's do a sweep of the model because that's really interesting, but no, the ones that we've chosen are the most important. And they're not all on here. Was pod. We were looking at what's the state of the process, do we know who owns it, and how good's the data that supports that process. And again, we're just using a standard red, amber, green model, and there's some definitions out there about what we mean. And you can see, student recruitment, and we've got some issues there where we don't really know what the processes are. It's got multiple owners, and the data's rubbish. Student engagement and retention, they absolutely know who owns it, but the processes around it aren't very good. The data that supports it aren't very good. And in fact, you tend to see a lot of that, two reds on the outside, because if you've got very poor data, then however good your process is, it's quite difficult to sort of enact that process successfully. So again, this was great sort of when we kind of moved down into the operational planning, because we said, okay, this capability at the conservatoire is really important. However, we have to work out what to do next. So therefore, let's look at where the red is on the map, and let's focus our efforts there, because we can't, and let's decide which ones we need to be green and which ones we can get away with being amber. And again, I think what the model's doing here is kind of visualizing the choices that you're making, because certainly at the conservatoire, their biggest issue was it just felt too big. It just felt too hard to translate what were agreed and absolutely representative strategic objectives into how does this affect my day-to-day life? How am I going to spend my extremely narrow amount of spare time? Yeah, and or if we start to run a project, what's it going to look like? What do we look at? So I think again the model here, both from a visual point of view, is really showing kind of the state of the nation. Again, it's a very good communications tool. Oh, I don't think that's red. Do you not? Why not? Okay, let's have that conversation. And it's also kind of saying we're not choosing my own turf. I'm not saying I really want to fix stuff in the estates development because I work in estates. It's if we don't fix this stuff, this is tied to a corporate objective. So again, this was not much work to workshop, but it was a nightmare to draw, as you can see. This stuff takes more time to kind of build the workshop output than it does to run the workshop, then you kind of know something's not right. And I know if you were into something like biz design, or biz design primarily, but other kind of EA tools, some of this stuff's a lot easier. But the world that we live in, those I don't know if Lex knows, but I don't know how prevalent that tool set is in this group. I don't know how many people get to use it, and certainly the smaller universities and conservatoires, they just would never be able to fund that. So we are, essentially into doing things in Visio. So I would love it if we could create something that would support those guys. That's a conversation I've been having with Lex. So that's the second example that we've done, and we can see from that we've allowed ourselves to create a bridge where we're saying we're going to focus on these things, and if that's red, then there's another version of this in which we've got the colors that they need to be, and so we've then said what's the gap analysis, what's the plan to get A to B. Yeah, so that's kind of this version. That's what that one does. So again, I'm going to just pause briefly. If there are any questions?
Nope. Good again.
Good again. All right. And the third one is ones that I'm just going to take just a drink, guys. Oh, right. Okay. The third one is again conservatoire, new student record system, extremely challenging for a small organisation. The market in HE student record systems is not really that well fitted to the smaller organisations, in my view, and therefore it's quite difficult to decide which one you want, because it sort of feels like you've just got to choose one, and kind of what your requirements are, and not really going to make a lot of difference because this is what you get. And it comes down to money, really, for the small organisations. Let's choose the cheapest one, or let's choose an FE version and try and modify it, which a lot of people did, and then we got to HESA Data Futures, and everybody kind of ran away from. So, so what we did here, which I think was again really useful, was we heat mapped the capability model, the version that we'd done for the conservatoire, And what we did is we said anything in red, we need some kind of tooling support for that. We need to find a way that whatever we buy supports those capabilities, because either they're Dynaditch stuff for us, or they're incredibly manual processes that we don't have time to do. And if we scale ourselves out by 10 to 15%, we definitely don't have time to do. So they've used this map to allow them to help them choose a provider. So they've essentially used this as a way to judge and to evaluate different providers. And they've this is not the only thing they use, but they've used it after each session. They've created a version of this per vendor with some notes, and then they've kind of looked at it and said, okay, who's got the greatest reach across the capabilities that we care about? Who in their core offering or what they're offering us feels closest to what we need rather than what we're trying to sell us. And I think that for them was a really positive way to view something, because the prevailing view was we're going to spend what feels like a lot of money for a conservatoire, and we just feel like we're being sold something that people have got on the shelf, and we're not sure that's right for us. So by using the capability map, we were able to augment the RFP and the other evaluation criteria, primarily around finance, to kind of, again, visualize, okay, vendor one looks like this. They've got 60% coverage, but they've got really good coverage on stuff that's red. Vendor two, they've got 80% coverage, but actually a lot of the stuff they do is on green. So that's kind of what we did that one for. So that was kind of a piece of work that was done for that conservatoire. And I think the total length of that engagement, there's quite a lot of stuff in there as well, with something like about 6 or 7 days. So I think we created a lot in terms of material to help them with where does our strategy fall in terms of our capabilities? How do we turn that into an operational model? How do we know where to focus on which capabilities need the most work? And if I've got kind of the biggest project that I'm doing this year, how do I evaluate what the best vendor is? Now, what really struck me when I was speaking to them about this was they said, if this hadn't been done for us, we could never do it. And I've heard that from almost everybody I work with. Nobody would have the time or, frankly, some of the skills to build this model. So I think it's a credit to the community that this model has been built, and it's open source, and it continues to get engagement and an interest. And I think without that, it would be very difficult for maybe most universities to use it. The last thing I would say on this model is, Lex talked a little bit at the start, and I gave you a brief overview. Like, what happens when people say it's not for me? I don't really think that represents me. I always come back to, if it's nothing else, it's the communications tools. It's a starting point. It gets us to a starting line. It's something that we can use to debate about what the next thing to do is, or I think you can bring people together. The key thing for me about this model that makes it different to a lot of other models that I've used in my career is most models need you to learn a language. BPMN, it's not kind of totally obvious about what everything means. Entity relationship diagrams, I love doing ERDs, but people will look at an ERD and go, what's that symbol mean? Is that one or more than one or less than one, or why is that thing up there? And all of that kind of stuff. If you have to teach somebody a language before they can essentially engage with the thing you're showing them, I think that's really difficult. The great thing about the capability model is you can teach it in 10 minutes, because people look at it, anybody from any side of the university, whether that's somebody working in IT, whether that's somebody who's teaching, whether that's somebody that's running it, whether that's a registrar, whether that's somebody in admissions, an alumni, they can look at this and they can kind of see a bit of their world in it, and they can engage with the model, because it kind of feels like a version of the university. And I think that's why having the capabilities at a high level and really keeping them separate from processes is really valuable, because it allows the model to sort of transition the fact that there is a lot of institutional autonomy and people do things differently. So that's kind of what we did for one person. And I'm now going to show you a couple more things where I kind of built a tool because I got sick of coloring things in Visio. And again, I'm just going to stop briefly
Yeah, hi Alex. Yeah, we've got a few. Firstly, how do you think the organization came to realize the needed EA and more specifically capability modeling?
Okay, I'll answer that. That's two questions. We don't call it enterprise architecture. Okay, I would not call this enterprise architecture to somebody like the Conservatoire because they hear that and that feels like a big thing that they couldn't afford. And I've had the same issue with data governance and everything else. So I'm very careful about what we call this. You know, I call this is a solution to a problem that you have. And I do kind of say to them, you know, this is kind of an enterprise architecture artifact, but we're not going to call it that. In terms of where they saw it because funnily enough, I was doing some training for them around data governance and, you know, kind of to manage their data better. And I said, oh, we've got half an hour at the end. Let me show you this thing that I've been working on with the sector. I think it's really cool. Just would like your views. Does it work for you guys? So I just put it up on the screen and said, and they went, oh yeah, it doesn't quite work for us. Because of these things I've talked to you about. And 2 months later, they rang me up and said, "Could we use it for this?" And I was like, "Yeah, absolutely." So I wish there was something where I said there was this great messaging thing that we did and all this stuff, but no, I just happened to pop it up on a end of a PowerPoint and talk about where it could be used. And they came in with the student record system. That's where we started. And after we'd done that, they went, "Oh no, we need to use this for other stuff."
Thanks, Alex. There's another one. So it's interesting. I'll just read it out to you. I'm currently working on organizational digital capabilities. I'm interested in the impact you're showing from your heat maps and pod analysis, and wondering if anyone has used any kind of digital capability lens on the model.
I would have to kind of get into a definition of digital capability. That's just because I'm a data guy, right? But I've looked at this across different lenses, not on this one, but in HE. not something I can show you because you'll know why when I give you the example. So I've looked at it saying I've used like an organizational lens across here where there's been a lot of work done around people capability that we've then mapped to the model and said, okay, where does that leave us in terms of, you know, which capabilities are most important to us and where are the capabilities within our that HR are kind of constructing from the development processes. So I've used different lenses on it. I haven't done a kind of a digital transformational lens or anything like that. I don't know about the rest of the group. It'd be really interesting then. Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone has done that and wants to feed back to me afterwards, please do.
Yeah, and again, if it's a conversation around what that is, feel free to let me drop me a line, and I can happy to talk to you about an email or something, because probably just need to understand a little bit more about what that lens would look like. There are things that this does not work well for, but I think if you've got a map of the organization that says, I think the organization does this, I think you can generally map it to the capability model. Sometimes where I've seen it struggle is where there's an enormous amount of work being done on process libraries, and people are then trying to kind of put the process libraries underneath the capability model, which should all fit, but the way they've been developed, they kind of don't. And then you're going to get into a thing like, we're not throwing all that process work away, you know. So I think it works well where you've got this kind of high level mapping. I think it's sometimes it's hard to integrate stuff where you've got quite a lot of detail underneath. That's my own view, and again, one for debate. So, okay, I'm going to show you a spreadsheet, right? So, again, tools, right? So pretty pragmatic. I'm not going to build something I can't give to everybody. You know, this stuff's all open source. So I'm not going to, I really want to create an application version of this. And there is some really good work going on at the University of Hertfordshire. A couple of guys there, David, I can't remember his name now. They're actually at UCISA today at the leadership group, and they are doing some quite cool stuff. They've taken an asset management tool, and they're trying to build into a capability tool. They showed it me a couple of weeks ago, and I thought it was great. And I'm going to recommend they come in and pitch to Lex for a webinar, because I think it's really interesting what they're doing. It doesn't quite work for me, but I completely get where they're coming from, and I think it could be a fantastic thing. This is not a fantastic thing. This is a bit of Excel jiggery pokery. So let me talk about this. Okay, this is a data view. There's lots of different ways to use this. If you kind of look at this, it sort of looks like the model. I sat in a hotel room one night and kind of created a version. This is all in Excel. And what we did is I just created a skeleton that you could put anything into it. Okay, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples of the skeleton and what that does. So what we're looking at here is we are looking at impact analysis. Okay, so we're looking at slightly lower down now in a kind of what an organization does with a capability map. So this
Alex,
is the university. Yeah.
Alex, just stop you a second. I'm still seeing the previous slide.
Oh, I know why that is. That's because I'm just being an idiot. Right. So I'll just really share that. Thanks, Rex. Alex, just call you Rex. I haven't had enough Lemsip this morning. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Okay. How's that, guys?
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. Okay. So what we're doing here is we're trying to understand the impact of something. Okay. So this is all this stuff I'm going to show you now is really about impact analysis. And what I'll take you kind of back to how's this data seeded and all of this kind of stuff. But for the moment, I just want to show you what the output of that is. And what we're showing there is we're saying from a data point of view, where do we capture stuff, where do we use stuff, and where do we capture and use stuff? And you can see on the themes here, we've got a number of themes, okay? So this particular university has got big issues around the way it collects contact details, the way it collects entry quals, the fact that it has multiple student IDs, student fees and invoicing are problematic, and having a course list, knowing which courses that we recruit to, so we can kind of tell marketing and we can tell people who run the CRM and we can kind of tell everybody else. It's insanely difficult. So we haven't even got time to start that because we could have the whole what is a course thing. And all of these are primarily driven out of work to try and improve the data quality. And what that did is it really surfaced a whole load of use cases. So everybody kind of goes, yeah, we know the contact details aren't great, but it's because the online enrollment form's not great. And we don't want to change that because it's really difficult. And if we change it, you know, we're going to get like 40 people involved and you're just going to have to carry on doing it. Sorry. But what we did was we kind of themed all these issues that we'd collected as part of the data governance, basically a data quality log. And we said, okay, I think there's 61 issues for contact details. And what we then did is we mapped them to the model. And we said, okay, what you see in orange on the model is that's where we collect the data, which kind of makes sense. You know, we collect stuff when we recruit people, when they apply internationally or domestically, when they actually go through the application process. We're always collecting or reconfirming contact details. And contact details in this case is a subset. It's kind of, you know, name, surname, date of birth, gender, sexual preference, term time postcode, home postcode, a bunch of other stuff. Email. We can have a whole conversation about whether or not you should have a university email, but we haven't got time for that either. But and whether students would email. So anyway, and we collected a graduation as well to make sure that we've got the right name on the certificate. Everybody goes, yeah, that's not very exciting. But here's in green is all the places we use that data. And this is not complete, by the way. I've actually modified this to make it generic, and there's lots more. And again, I'm not going to go through all of them, but there's things like, you know, a lot of this stuff, like where do the students come from? You know, kind of where on the Apollo quintile, what do we mean for access agreement? What it means for WP? All of this stuff, there's a lot of this stuff that kind of drives a lot of the way we do our strategic plans. Certainly drives there's a lot of reporting around this stuff. And some of that is in our corporate metrics. A lot of it we return to HESA and other bodies. So already we're saying, actually, this data up here is really important. And then down here, we just use it in all sorts of places. And if you look down at the bottom here, look at all these other places that we use this data. So all of a sudden, there's not on this one, but on the one that's real, there's 42 different cases of where we use that bucket of attributes. I think it's about 11. And in nearly half of them, they clean that data. So what this is showing is that we are creating, let's take 40 and half of that, 20 places we have got people cleansing data that we collect poorly, primarily in this portion of the capability map. So if we stopped doing this poorly, there are potentially 20 places where we're going to release an amount of time. Not on this one, at a different university, I did some work and we thought it's something like 3/4 of a year of an FTE. That's how much data we found. And that's without getting into the frustration, the difficulty of rekeying, the problems of comparison, all of that stuff. So again, what this is really is kind of trying to show the totality of stuff. Trying to get beyond the anecdote is how I think of it. When people say, "Oh, I don't think it's a problem," and I'm like, "Okay, this is what it looks like." And if I look at some of the other ones, entry calls it doesn't look quite so bad, but it's poor entry calls obviously massively affects your position in the league table. I think this university found 15,000 tariff points, but it took them 4.5 weeks to find it by going through individual student records in the planning department. And there's some issues about why it's not collected properly. These are behavioural issues, and I'm not going to get into it. So it's not that people are not doing their jobs. They're just, the kind of the value of the data here and the cost of the data here are kind of different things. But again, it's up here. It's really important stuff, and it's this is where our issue is, but we're not fixing it, and because of that, the people in planning are spending loads and loads of time fixing it, and we've got these issues. So it's just really helping to show where these problems are, and it's really kind of visualizing it. And like I say, it's getting beyond the story, beyond the anecdote, saying, okay, I can give you underneath here what the list of issues that I have. I can tell you how much time it takes me in my department to make the entry qualifications fit for purpose, because it's fit for purpose for these guys, it's just not fit for purpose for these guys. It's a data governance issue, it's a behavioral issue. What you're doing here is kind of setting the scene, getting everybody to the start line, saying this is problem. Let's agree this is the problem. We can all agree what the solution is. And if you say we're not going to do anything about it, then fine. Don't ask this person that spends 8 weeks a year going through individual student records to do anything else, because they can't, because you've told them that you don't care. So I find this really valuable to kind of make people who are senior accountable for their decisions. There were loads around people talking about changing stuff on the timetables, and we don't collect that data on the timetabling system. And somebody's got to be accountable for the cost of doing that. And I'm looking at the time, so I'm going to show you one more and then leave time for questions, unless there are any questions currently, Lex.
No, I think we can cover those at the end.
All right. Let me show you the other one. Okay, data futures. Anybody who's working on data futures, what we did with this is the same spreadsheet. What we did is this is the data futures schema. I'm not going to go through it. These are all the fields we have to return to HESA. What I did, this is how you do it. Let me make that a bit bigger. So for each of them, let's take something like disability. This, what it is, it's just a drop down. It's based on the it's based on the model. Yeah, it's like it's kind of where do we collect the data is on the left, and where do we use the data is on the right. Yeah, and here I have basically created a thing which is all the definitions. And if I can't find one because I can't know what it means, I actually did a thing so I could actually look it up because I got sick of trying to find them in the spreadsheet. So we created a lookup which allows us to map these. So for each of the major, these are just the entities and not all the attributes. But for each of the major things we return to HESA, let's have a look at the implications of that, and let's understand where we collect our data. And again, this is really used for project planning. It's to say, okay, you'll see it when I show you the analysis, that you kind of go, oh, these capabilities are really important for data futures, so we better make sure our processes for collection are really good here. And again, it also shows you some really interesting things about the university. So this is disability. Look at all the places we use disability. It's in, all of these places down here, even things like making sure we can, if somebody's physically disabled, we can get them somewhere to park. Different healthcare management, different accommodation, loads of stuff, disability support, housing advice, personal tutor, but even things like student placement. Again, really, really important that we have that information. Disability information is generally collected very poorly at some universities. And again, you can see all these places that it has to be clean, but actually, that's not really the point. The point when you get into this level is bad data has consequences. And this is about, giving students a poor experience. But there's a flip side of that, which is the university stands up all of these services. And if the students don't know about them, they don't get to use them. And what we find is that because there's a longer conversation about the students don't actually trust the university to look after the data, they don't give it to them. So all of these things that we stand up, we don't offer to people because they don't want to give us that data. So this is not as cold as saying, right, okay, for data futures, for in-year reporting, we must make sure that we have the right disability data collected here. It's about more than that, because if we don't do that, then there are some consequences of bad data. I'm going to show you one more because it just always makes me laugh. I love this. I love the fact that universities really care about disability. It really, and you know, visually on the map here, we can show, you know, how the look at what the university is doing. They're taking this really seriously. They're standing up all these services behind these capabilities. And then I look at, let me find it, sexual orientation. I love this. We collect it, we exhaust it, we just don't care, right? You know, and again, I think that's great. You know, right on. So these maps are more than just something that we can use to help drive the project. They sort of tell you what the university is doing with the data at quite a low level, and I love that. And the fact that you have to get all the subject matter experts in the room to talk to you about it, and you know, people get very excited and very passionate. You learn a lot about the university. I've done some basic analysis on that, which kind of looks like this. So one of this is saying is, okay, for HESA, for data futures, we need to look at this capability because this is where we collect data. Interestingly, you know, the second place that we need to look is actually in curriculum because that's where a lot of the poor data is seeded. So I've done some, you know, there's some basic analysis in the spreadsheet which kind of shows you, you know, which capabilities are in use and all of that kind of stuff. So that's kind of, you know, that's free. If anybody wants that, you're more than welcome to it. You know, the only thing I would say to it is provided without license or warranty because if you look at that, for example, that function up there, it gets a bit complicated, but you are absolutely more than welcome and to take it on and to use it yourself. And I can either issue it on a spreadsheet or issue it on an email or whatever. So you are more than welcome if it's of interest to take that away. So I guess my closing comments on it are that, let me just stop sharing that now, just so I can see what the questions are. So that's a real whistle-stop tour of the map, and I think what I hope I've shown you is that you can kind of use it anywhere. Just need to be a bit creative. I think as a static map, it's not that valuable. You know, I think heat mapping it, you know, finding ways to link it to other things the university is doing, all of that kind of stuff is what really brings the value out of it. But I would say in the last year, and I've used it in quite a few places, it's been at its strongest where we've tried to create communication, where we've tried to say, let's get to the start line, where we've used it to get people in a state that we can really start talking about the problem. I would say I've used less of it around some of the things I expected, around sort of, you know, linking it to process libraries and all the other kind of stuff. You know, that might just be kind of maturity of the model, maturity of the sector, but that's been its primary use. But don't for a second think that doesn't make it valuable. It's certainly made my life easier. I've learned loads about universities, and I thought I knew quite a lot already. And I've engaged a whole bunch of people that didn't care about this stuff. So I would call that a win. Right, there we go. I'm done.
Thank you, Alex. Much appreciated. Just pick up on a few questions if I can. We've got a few here. Ignoring a greenfield environment, how do we map existing systems to this model?
Well, I've seen that done at Coventry, in fact. But we have done it at Coventry. We did a whole bunch of capability workshops at Coventry, which made it a bit easier. So each capability we looked at, we had the application experts in the room, and they mapped it to that, which obviously is a massive piece of work. What I've seen done elsewhere is people have kind of gone, okay, we've got 400 applications, let's pick the 25 that we care about, and then you know, just kind of do essentially a finger pointing exercise and saying, let's map these to the capabilities. Where I've seen it done, these guys at Hertfordshire who are doing it in the tool, it's amazing because they kind of show, okay, if we change this application, here's all the capabilities that are going to get affected by it. So I haven't seen enough of that done. I think it's really powerful in the same way that I think linking it to data entities is really powerful. Almost in like an ITIL sort of, you know, kind of like you kind of build a service catalog. You know, I think this kind of capability catalog, I think that would be absolutely fantastic. But really, if you are starting with 400 apps, I think you have to pick a subset and look at the capability model and potentially add some more levels below it, because it is very high level with just the level 1s and level 2s.
Okay, thank you. There's a couple of questions around accessing the spreadsheet tool and specifically the HESA Data Futures model.
Yeah, it's fine. There's a blank version of the model because I can't give you obviously somebody else's. So, but it's got all of the entities in there, so you just need to go and fill it in for your own university. There's a version on my website which you can have, or I can just email it to the EA group on JISC, whatever you prefer, or both.
Yeah, smashing. We'll pick that up afterwards. Thank you. There's another question which I think we've talked about a little bit already. Let me just find it. About whether we've used the model in any EA tooling. So
so I've seen a lot of work go into biz design with a couple of universities, and actually doing the whole POLDAT thing. And I've done some work mapping sort of essentially logical / conceptual models into it, and applications, and it's really powerful. But God, it's a lot of work. I think looking back, if I was absolutely honest, have we realized the value of that work? I'm not sure we have yet. I think we were very keen to show it could be done. I'm not sure we understood the problem we were trying to fix. So I think it's incredibly valuable to be able to link it in with the other kind of EA artifacts, but I think you've got to have a use case for it. The idea of creating some kind of utopian solution where everything is mapped, I think, is insane.
Just to add to that, it's probably worth pointing out that on the UCISA website, the capability model website, there's a download section to the right of the screen, and there is I think XML version of the model that can be loaded into EA tools, including things like Archie, which is the open source one.
That's true, it does, and it works well in Archie. Lex, good point.
Yeah, so it's there if people want to have a go with it. That's where you can find it.
Yeah. Just reading the bottom of this. Yeah, I should have. For those that you don't know, this came from the original AT model came from the Cordit model. We're very grateful for that. I think it's University of I can't remember which one it is now. So yeah, if you've done it in ARIS, then it's different, but the structure is very similar. The capabilities within the structure are different. I have a look at spreadsheets and see where they're close. But yeah, if you've got it in ARIS, you've got 75% of it there. I had to use ARIS in Deloitte. That was the tool that we used, and I hated it. I don't know. I assume it's a lot better now, but it was like using a 3270 tool back in the day, a few years ago. Just going to answer Kevin's question, if I may, Lex.
Yep.
What's the heat debate where the student extraction capability sits in the model? There was a lot of heated debates about where stuff sat in the model. For some reason, accommodation was the one that comes to mind. I remember at the end of that session just wanting to sit under the desk and rock gently, crying. I can't remember whether there was an enormous amount of debate. I don't think I've had many people who understand it better than me challenge where it is in the model. But that might just be my own experience. So no, I don't remember a particularly heated debate about where that sits. All right. Sounds like we're done, Lex.
Yep, just checking. Brilliant. I think that's it, isn't it? So thank you. I really appreciate the time you've taken to share that with us, and thank you to everybody who's joined us today for the webinar. So a final point from me is if anyone has some things that they'd like to share at a future webinar, then please do get in touch with me. We can have a chat about that.
Yeah, and Lex, you and I can talk about logistics of providing those, providing that material. It might just take me a couple of days just to get a version that looks okay, guys. But yeah, absolutely, very happy for you to share. Really happy to get your views on it, and if you do something with it that's different, really happy to see that as well. So yeah, let's. I think as a community, there's much we can do.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alex.
All right, guys. Love to talk to you. Take care.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.